Victoria Hamilton had everything money could buy, but for 20 years, she'd been searching for the one thing that mattered most. She walked into Sunrise Diner that Tuesday morning, just another stop in her endless journey across the country. "Good morning. Coffee to start." The young waitress's voice was warm, genuine. Victoria looked up, and her world stopped. There, on the girl's right wrist, as she poured the coffee, was a star-shaped birthmark, the exact birthmark her daughter had. 20 years ago, 2-year-old Chloe had that same mark, the day she vanished from a Chicago mall playground. Victoria's hands began to shake. Could it be? After all these years of searching, was her daughter serving her coffee? "Ma'am, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Jessica's concern was genuine, but she had no idea how right she was. The coffee cup slipped from Victoria's trembling hands, crashing to the floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the quiet diner. I have to go." Victoria stood so quickly her chair nearly toppled. She threw money on the table and rushed toward the door. Jessica stood there confused, watching the elegant woman flee as if her life depended on it. What had just happened? Outside, Victoria's heart pounded as she fumbled for her car keys. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She sat in her car, tears streaming down her face, and dialed a number she knew by heart. "Detective Brooks? It's Victoria Hamilton. I think I found her." For 20 years, this moment had been her obsession, her driving force, her reason to keep breathing. The birthmark was unmistakable, the same star-shaped mark that had haunted her dreams for 2 decades. Back inside, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that something life-changing had just happened. Detective Brooks had worked hundreds of missing person cases, but Victoria Hamilton's had never left his mind. He remembered the tiny birthmark from the original case files. 1 in a million, the doctors had said. Victoria sat in her car, staring back at the diner. Should she go back in? What if she was wrong again? Inside, Jessica continued her shift, unaware that her entire world was about to change forever. Before we continue this incredible journey, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if this story has already captured your heart. Subscribe for more amazing true stories that will touch your soul. 20 years earlier, Victoria Hamilton was a rising star in the business world. At 32, she owned 3 boutique hotels and was expanding rapidly. That sunny Saturday afternoon in Chicago's Millennium Mall, she thought she had everything under control. Little Chloe was playing safely on the playground while Victoria took what she thought would be a quick business call. "Yes, I can close the Denver deal by Monday," she said into her phone, her eyes occasionally glancing at her daughter. The call lasted longer than expected as the investor on the other end kept asking questions about profit margins and expansion timelines. 2-year-old Chloe giggled as she climbed the small slide for the 10th time that afternoon. Her little star-shaped birthmark caught the mall's fluorescent lighting as she reached for the monkey bars. She was an adventurous child, always exploring, always curious about the world around her. Victoria had often worried that Chloe's fearless nature would get her into trouble someday. She never imagined how prophetic that fear would become. Other parents smiled at the energetic toddler who seemed to bring joy wherever she went with her infectious laughter and bright personality. When Victoria finally ended the call and looked up, the playground seemed different, quieter. Her eyes scanned the colorful equipment where Chloe had been playing just minutes before. "Chloe," she called out, her voice still calm, but with a hint of concern. She walked around the play area, checking behind slides and under climbing structures. "Chloe, honey, where are you?" The other parents looked up from their conversations, some starting to help search when they saw Victoria's growing panic. A security guard noticed the commotion and approached with his radio in hand. Within minutes, the mall was in lockdown. Police officers arrived as Victoria sat in the security office, tears streaming down her face as she gave Chloe's description for what felt like the 100th time. She's 2 years old, curly auburn hair, brown eyes, wearing a pink dress with butterflies. She has a star-shaped birthmark on her right wrist. Victoria repeated, her voice breaking with each word. The security cameras showed Chloe playing on the playground, but then there was a blind spot near the main entrance. The footage showed Victoria on her phone, completely absorbed in her business call, unaware that her world was about to shatter. David Hamilton arrived at the police station within the hour, his face pale with shock and fear. "How could this happen, Victoria?" he asked, though his tone held more desperation than blame. Victoria couldn't even look at her husband. The guilt was already consuming her alive. Detective William Brooks, a seasoned investigator with kind but serious eyes, sat across from them, taking detailed notes. "We've issued an Amber Alert," he assured them. "Every police department in a 3-state radius has Chloe's description. We're going to find her." But even as he spoke those words, Brooks had seen too many cases like this. Time was their enemy now. By evening, Chloe's face was on every television screen in Chicago. 2-year-old Chloe Hamilton disappeared from Millennium Mall this afternoon, the news anchor reported with practiced solemnity. "Police are asking anyone with information to call the number on your screen immediately." Victoria watched from her living room, barely recognizing her own daughter's photo on the television. It felt surreal, like watching someone else's nightmare. The phone rang constantly with calls from reporters, well-meaning friends, and, unfortunately, a few cruel prank callers. David fielded most of the calls while Victoria sat staring at Chloe's empty high chair. Months turned into years, and the case grew cold despite Victoria's relentless efforts. She hired private investigators, psychics, and anyone who claimed they could help. Their beautiful home became a command center filled with maps, photographs, and leads that went nowhere. "Victoria, we need to start thinking about moving forward," David said gently one evening, but the words hit her like a physical blow. "Moving forward?" she whispered. "Our daughter is out there somewhere, and you want to give up?" The distance between them grew wider each day, the grief manifesting differently in each of their hearts. 3 years after Chloe's disappearance, Victoria signed the divorce papers with a trembling hand. David had remarried within a year and moved to California, unable to live with the constant reminder of their loss. Victoria couldn't blame him, but she also couldn't forgive him for giving up. "I'll never stop looking for her," she told him during their final conversation. "I know," David replied sadly. "That's what scares me about you, Victoria. You're going to spend your whole life chasing a ghost." But Victoria knew something David didn't understand. A mother's love doesn't have an expiration date. 15 years after Chloe disappeared, Victoria had spent over $2 million on private investigators and searches across 47 states. Her hotel business had suffered as she poured every resource into finding her daughter. Detective Brooks, now retired, still helped her review cold cases and potential leads. "Victoria," he said gently during one of their meetings, "maybe it's time to consider that Chloe might not want to be found. If someone took her and raised her, she might not even know she was kidnapped." The words stung, but Victoria's resolve never wavered. Somewhere out there, her little girl was alive, and she would find her. By her 52nd birthday, Victoria's life had become a monument to loss and determination. Her mansion felt like a museum dedicated to a missing child, with age-progressed photos showing what Chloe might look like at 5, 10, 15, and 20 years old. Friends had stopped visiting years ago, unable to watch Victoria's obsession consume her life. She ate dinner alone every night, always setting 2 plates out of habit, always hoping that somehow, someway, her daughter would walk through that door. That Tuesday morning, when she decided to drive through Denver, she had no idea that her 20-year search was finally about to end. Detective William Brooks had been retired for 3 years, but Victoria Hamilton's case had never truly left his desk. When his phone rang that Tuesday evening, and he heard her voice trembling with a mixture of hope and desperation, he knew immediately that something significant had happened. "Detective Brooks, it's Victoria Hamilton. I think I found her," she had said, and despite his years of experience dealing with false leads and broken dreams, something in her tone made him listen carefully. He had seen Victoria chase hundreds of leads over the past 20 years, each one ending in heartbreak, but this felt different. As she sat in his living room now, describing the star-shaped birthmark on the young waitress's wrist, Brooks felt the familiar stirring of a case that might finally have a breakthrough. "Tell me about this birthmark again," Brooks said as they sat in his car across from Sunrise Diner the next morning. Victoria's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone, showing him photos of baby Chloe that clearly displayed the distinctive star-shaped mark on her tiny wrist. "It's exactly the same, Detective. The same size, the same location, even the same slightly irregular edges. What are the odds of finding another person with an identical birthmark in the exact same spot?" Brooks studied the photos carefully, his trained eye comparing them to his mental image of the young waitress from their brief observation earlier. He had to admit, Victoria was right about the uniqueness of such a mark. In his 40 years of law enforcement, he had never seen two people with identical birthmarks, especially one so distinctive and in such a specific location. Brooks used his connections to access public records for Jessica Mitchell, and what they found was troubling. According to official documents, Jessica had been found by Frank and Carol Mitchell when she was approximately 2 years old, but there were no police reports, no Child Protective Services documentation, and no formal adoption papers from that time period. "This is highly irregular," Brooks muttered as he scrolled through the sparse records. When a child is found abandoned, there's always a paper trail, police reports, hospital records, social services involvement. But Jessica's legal existence seems to begin when the Mitchells registered her for kindergarten 3 years later. Victoria felt her heart racing as the implications became clear. The timeline matched perfectly with Chloe's disappearance, and the lack of proper documentation suggested that the Mitchells had never reported finding Jessica to the authorities as required by law. Victoria returned to the diner the next day, this time prepared to observe Jessica more carefully without causing another scene. She chose a corner booth that gave her a clear view of the dining room and watched the young woman work. What she saw took her breath away. Jessica had the same habit of tucking her hair behind her left ear when she was thinking, exactly like Chloe used to do as a toddler. She walked with a slight bounce in her step, the same energetic gait that Victoria remembered from 20 years ago. When Jessica laughed at something a customer said, Victoria heard an echo of her baby's giggle that she thought she had forgotten. Even the way Jessica held her pen while taking orders, with her thumb positioned slightly higher than most people, was identical to how Chloe had gripped her crayons. These small details that only a mother would notice were building an undeniable case in Victoria's heart. When Jessica's shift ended, Victoria approached her near the storage room, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "Excuse me, Jessica," she called out, and the young woman turned with that same bright smile that had stopped Victoria's world the day before. "Hi there. You're the lady from yesterday who seemed upset. Are you feeling better?" Jessica's concern was genuine, and Victoria could see the kindness in her eyes that reminded her so much of David's gentle nature. "I'm much better, thank you. I was wondering, this might sound strange, but I'm looking to hire someone trustworthy for my business. Would you be interested in hearing about a better opportunity?" It was a lie, but Victoria needed a reason to spend time with Jessica to learn more about her background without raising suspicions. She couldn't bear the thought of being wrong again, but she also couldn't walk away from what felt like the answer to 20 years of prayers. They sat in a small coffee shop down the street, and Victoria struggled to maintain her composure as Jessica talked about her life. "I've always felt like something was missing, you know," Jessica said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "The Mitchells are wonderful parents, don't get me wrong, but I've always had these weird dreams about being in a place with lots of noise and bright lights. And there's this woman with blonde hair who's crying. It sounds crazy, but sometimes I wake up feeling like I've lost something important." Victoria's hands began to shake as she realized Jessica was describing the mall where Chloe had disappeared. The lots of noise and bright lights could easily be the busy shopping center, and the crying blonde woman was undoubtedly herself on that terrible day. Every word Jessica spoke felt like another piece of a puzzle that had been missing for 2 decades, and Victoria had to excuse herself to the bathroom to collect her composure. That evening, Brooks made discreet inquiries about Frank Mitchell's employment history. What he discovered made Victoria's suspicions seem even more credible. In 2003, the year Chloe disappeared, Frank had worked for a moving company that had contracts throughout the Chicago area, including regular deliveries to Millennium Mall. According to employment records, Frank had called in sick the day after Chloe's disappearance, but had worked the day before, which would have put him in the area at exactly the right time. This could be coincidence, Brooks warned Victoria, though his expression suggested he was beginning to believe her theory. But it's also possible that Frank was at the mall that day, saw a lost child, and made a spontaneous decision that changed 3 lives forever. The pieces were falling into place in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. Brooks also investigated Carol Mitchell's background and found that she had worked as a pediatric nurse at Chicago General Hospital until 2004, the year after Chloe's disappearance. Hospital records showed that Carol had access to birth certificates and medical records, which would have made it easier for her to create documentation for a child who had no official paperwork. A former colleague remembered Carol taking an extended leave of absence in late 2003, claiming she needed time to care for a family matter. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. If the Mitchells had found Chloe and decided to keep her, Carol would have had the medical knowledge and access to help them create a new identity for the child. The more they investigated, the more convinced Victoria became that Jessica was indeed her lost daughter. Driving home that night, Victoria felt a mixture of hope and terror that threatened to overwhelm her. For 20 years, she had imagined this moment, the possibility of finding Chloe alive and well. But now that it seemed within reach, she realized she was terrified of being wrong again. Her heart couldn't handle another false lead, another dead end that would send her spiraling back into despair. At the same time, every maternal instinct she possessed was screaming that Jessica was her daughter. The birthmark, the physical resemblances, the timeline, the dreams Jessica described, it all fit too perfectly to be coincidence. But what if the Mitchells refused to cooperate? What if Jessica rejected her? What if DNA tests proved she was wrong? The fear of having her hopes crushed again was almost as strong as her desperate need to know the truth. That night, Victoria sat surrounded by photo albums she hadn't looked through in years, studying every picture of baby Chloe and comparing them to her memories of Jessica. The facial structure was remarkably similar, and she could see hints of David's gentle expression in Jessica's smile. She found a video on her phone from earlier that day when Jessica had laughed at something a customer said, and she played it over and over, listening for familiar inflections in her voice. The more she analyzed every detail, the more convinced she became that she had found her daughter. Tomorrow, she decided she would tell Detective Brooks that she was ready to approach the Mitchell family directly. 20 years of searching had led to this moment, and she couldn't wait any longer for answers. Her little girl was alive, working as a waitress just a few miles away, and it was time to bring her home. Victoria entered the diner the next morning with a carefully crafted plan. She had rehearsed her story about being a businesswoman looking for reliable employees, and she was determined to observe Jessica more closely without causing another emotional outburst. She chose the same corner booth that gave her an unobstructed view of the dining room and ordered coffee from another waitress, explaining that she was waiting for someone. As she sat there pretending to check her phone, Victoria watched Jessica move through the restaurant with a grace that seemed hauntingly familiar. The way Jessica carried the coffee pot reminded her of how little Chloe used to carry her favorite stuffed animal, with both hands treating it like something precious that needed protection. These small details that only a mother would notice were building an undeniable case in Victoria's heart, but she forced herself to remain objective and gather more evidence before drawing conclusions. What Victoria witnessed over the next hour convinced her beyond any doubt that she was watching her daughter. Jessica had an extraordinary way with the elderly customers that reminded Victoria of Chloe's natural empathy as a toddler. She watched as Jessica patiently helped an old man read the menu, her voice gentle and respectful in a way that couldn't be taught. When an elderly woman accidentally knocked over her water glass, Jessica's immediate response wasn't frustration, but concern for the woman's embarrassment. "Don't worry about it, honey," Jessica said with genuine warmth. "Happens to me all the time." The kindness in her voice and the protective way she handled the situation was identical to how 2-year-old Chloe had always tried to comfort her stuffed animals when they got hurt. Victoria had to grip her coffee cup tightly to keep from crying as she watched her daughter's inherent goodness shine through 20 years of separation. The physical mannerisms were the most compelling evidence. Victoria noticed that Jessica had the same unconscious habit of tucking her hair behind her left ear when she was concentrating, exactly like Chloe used to do as a toddler when she was trying to stack blocks or work on a puzzle. The way Jessica held her pen while taking orders, with her thumb positioned slightly higher than most people would naturally grip it, was identical to how Chloe had held her crayons when scribbling on paper. Even Jessica's laugh had the same musical quality that Victoria remembered from 20 years ago, a sound that had once filled their house with joy and had been absent from Victoria's life ever since. When Jessica smiled at something a customer said, Victoria could see hints of David's gentle expression mixed with her own determined jawline. The combination of features created a face that was uniquely beautiful and heartbreakingly familiar. Victoria also observed Jessica's work habits and was amazed by the attention to detail that mirrored her own perfectionist tendencies. Jessica arranged the plates on her tray with mathematical precision, ensuring that each order was perfect before delivering it to the table. She double-checked every coffee cup to make sure it was filled to the right level and wiped down tables with a thoroughness that went beyond what her job required. These weren't behaviors that someone typically learned from adoptive parents. They were ingrained personality traits that often passed from parent to child. Victoria remembered how even as a toddler, Chloe had been obsessed with making sure her toys were arranged just so, getting upset if someone moved them even slightly. The meticulous nature she was observing in Jessica felt like watching a genetic echo of herself, a reminder that some aspects of personality transcend environmental influence. When Jessica's break time arrived, Victoria knew this was her opportunity to have a more substantial conversation. She approached the young woman near the employee break room, her heart hammering so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "Jessica," she called softly, and when the young woman turned with that same bright smile that had stopped Victoria's world the day before, she almost lost her composure again. "Hi there. You came back," Jessica said with genuine warmth. "I was worried about you yesterday. You seemed really upset. Are you feeling better?" The concern in Jessica's voice was so real, so caring, that Victoria had to take a deep breath before responding. "Much better. Thank you for asking. I was wondering, I know this might sound unusual, but I'm expanding my hotel business, and I'm looking for someone with your natural people skills. Would you be interested in discussing a management position?" It was a carefully constructed lie, but Victoria needed a legitimate reason to spend more time with Jessica without arousing suspicion. They walked to a quiet coffee shop down the street, and Victoria found herself hanging on every word Jessica spoke about her life and dreams. "I've always wanted to do something more meaningful with my life," Jessica confided, stirring honey into her tea. "Don't get me wrong, I'm grateful for everything the Mitchells have done for me, but I've always felt like there was something bigger I was meant to do. Sometimes I have these dreams where I'm in this beautiful hotel, and I'm helping people feel welcomed and safe. It's probably silly, but I wake up feeling like that's where I belong." Victoria's breath caught in her throat as she realized Jessica was describing the exact type of hospitality business that Victoria had built. The fact that Jessica was naturally drawn to the hotel industry, without knowing anything about Victoria's background, felt like more than coincidence. It felt like destiny calling her daughter home. As their conversation deepened, Jessica opened up about the strange gaps in her childhood memories and the recurring dreams that had haunted her for years. "The thing is, I don't remember anything before I was about 4 or 5 years old. The Mitchells say I was traumatized when they found me, and that's why I blocked out the early memories. But sometimes I have these incredibly vivid dreams about being in a place with lots of noise and bright lights. And there's this woman with blonde hair who's crying and calling out a name I can't quite make out." Victoria's hands began to tremble as she realized Jessica was describing the mall where Chloe had disappeared, and the crying blonde woman was undoubtedly herself searching desperately for her lost daughter. "In the dream, I want to run to the woman because something tells me she's important, but I can't move my feet," Jessica continued. "I always wake up feeling like I've lost something precious, but I can never figure out what is. Every word felt like a knife to Victoria's heart, because she knew exactly what Jessica had lost: her mother, her real family, her true identity. Victoria excused herself to the bathroom, where she finally allowed the tears she'd been holding back to flow freely. Looking at her reflection in the mirror, she saw 20 years of grief and hope warring in her own eyes. Everything Jessica had described, the dreams about the mall, the crying blonde woman, the feeling of having lost something precious, it all matched perfectly with the day Chloe disappeared. But what struck Victoria most deeply was Jessica's description of wanting to run to the woman in her dreams, but being unable to move. That detail felt too specific, too emotionally accurate to be coincidence. A 2-year-old who had been frightened and confused in a crowded mall might very well have felt that same paralysis, wanting to reach for her mother, but being too scared or overwhelmed to move. Victoria splashed cold water on her face and tried to compose herself, knowing she needed to be strong for what was coming next. The time for subtlety and careful investigation was ending soon. She would have to take the terrifying step of revealing the truth. When Victoria returned to the table, Jessica immediately noticed her red-rimmed eyes and reached out to touch her arm with instinctive compassion. "Are you okay? You look like you've been crying," Jessica said with the same nurturing concern that Victoria remembered from Chloe's early childhood. Even as a toddler, Chloe had been incredibly sensitive to other people's emotions, always trying to comfort anyone who seemed sad or upset. "I'm fine," Victoria managed to say, though her voice was thick with emotion. "You remind me of someone very important to me, someone I lost a long time ago." Jessica's expression softened with understanding. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said quietly. "I can't imagine how painful that must be." The irony of the moment wasn't lost on Victoria. Her daughter was comforting her for the loss of her daughter, not knowing that she was looking at the very person she had been mourning for 20 years. The circular tragedy of the situation made Victoria's heart ache even more intensely. That evening, Victoria sat in her car outside the diner, watching Jessica finish her shift through the large front windows. The golden sunset light streaming through the glass seemed to create a halo around Jessica's auburn hair, and Victoria was struck by how beautiful and strong her daughter had grown up to be. Despite being raised away from her real family, despite having no memory of her early life, Jessica had developed into exactly the kind of person Victoria had always hoped Chloe would become: kind, hardworking, empathetic, and genuinely caring about others. The Mitchells might have stolen Jessica's true identity, but they hadn't been able to steal her inherent goodness or the genetic traits that connected her to Victoria. As she watched Jessica say goodbye to her coworkers and walk toward the bus stop, Victoria made a decision that would change all of their lives forever. Tomorrow, she would ask Detective Brooks to help her approach the Mitchell family directly. The time for watching from a distance was over. It was time to reclaim her daughter and reveal the truth that had been hidden for 20 years. During their coffee break, Victoria carefully steered the conversation toward Jessica's childhood, trying to appear casually interested rather than desperately searching for answers. "You mentioned you don't remember much about your early years," Victoria said, her voice carefully controlled. "That must be difficult sometimes." Jessica stirred her tea thoughtfully, a shadow crossing her features. "It is strange," she admitted. "The Mitchells are wonderful parents, but I've always felt like there's this missing piece of myself that I can't quite reach. They say I was found when I was very young and had been through something traumatic, which is why I blocked out those early memories." "The dreams are the worst part," Jessica continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I have these incredibly vivid nightmares about being lost in this huge, noisy place with bright lights everywhere. There's this woman with blonde hair who's crying and calling out a name that sounds like, well, it's hard to make out, but it sounds like Chloe. She seems so desperate, so heartbroken, and in the dream I want to run to her because something deep inside tells me she's important to me." Victoria's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as her hands began to tremble. Jessica was describing the exact scene from the mall, and she was remembering her real name. "But here's the strangest part," Jessica went on, completely unaware of the emotional earthquake she was causing in Victoria. In the dream, I try to run to this woman, but my feet won't move. It's like I'm frozen with fear, even though every instinct tells me to go to her. Then there are these other people, a man and a woman, and they're pulling me away from the crying lady. The man has kind eyes, but he looks scared, and the woman keeps saying, "It's okay, sweetheart, we'll take care of you." But it doesn't feel okay in the dream. It feels like something precious is being torn away from me forever. Victoria excused herself to the restroom, where she broke down completely. Jessica's description of the dream matched the day of the kidnapping with terrifying accuracy, right down to the detail about Frank and Carol Mitchell taking her away from them all. The fact that Jessica remembered her real name, even if only subconsciously, was proof that some part of her had never forgotten her true identity. Victoria splashed cold water on her face and stared at her reflection, knowing that she was looking at a woman who was about to reclaim her daughter after 20 years of heartbreak. But she also knew she had to be careful about how she revealed the truth. When Victoria returned to the table, Jessica immediately reached out with instinctive compassion. "You're really upset," Jessica observed with genuine concern. "I'm sorry if talking about my dreams brought up painful memories for you." The irony wasn't lost on Victoria. Her daughter was comforting her about the loss of her daughter, not knowing they were the same person. "You have no idea how much your story means to me," Victoria managed to say through her tears. "The woman in your dreams, the one calling for Chloe. What if I told you that woman never stopped looking for the child she lost?" Jessica's expression grew confused and slightly alarmed. "What do you mean? You're talking about my dreams like they're real memories." Victoria realized she was moving too fast, revealing too much too soon. She couldn't dump 20 years of truth on Jessica all at once without proof and support. "I'm sorry," Victoria said, forcing herself to pull back. You remind me so much of someone I knew. Someone very important to me." Jessica studied Victoria's face carefully, clearly sensing there was more to this conversation than met the eye. "This is about more than a job opportunity, isn't it?" she asked quietly. As they parted ways outside the coffee shop, Jessica seemed troubled by their conversation. I'm sorry, I didn't catch her last name," she said. "Hamilton." "Victoria Hamilton," Victoria replied, watching Jessica's face carefully for any sign of recognition. There was a flicker of something, confusion, perhaps, or a buried memory trying to surface, but Jessica didn't make the connection. "Mrs. Hamilton, I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for," Jessica said softly. "And I hope the person you lost, I hope you get the closure you need." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow, because closure wasn't what she wanted. She wanted her daughter back. Sitting in her car, Victoria immediately called Detective Brooks. "She remembers," Victoria said without preamble when he answered. "She has dreams about the mall, about me calling her name, about Frank and Carol taking her away. She even remembers hearing the name Chloe." Brooks was quiet for a long moment. "Victoria, this is significant evidence, but we need to approach this carefully. If we confront the Mitchells without proper preparation, they might panic and disappear. We need DNA evidence, and we need to handle this through proper legal channels." But Victoria's maternal instincts were screaming that she had waited long enough. Meanwhile, Jessica walked home from the bus stop, her mind racing with questions about her strange encounter with Victoria Hamilton. Something about the woman felt familiar in a way that went beyond their brief interactions. The intensity of Victoria's emotional reactions, the way she seemed to know details about Jessica's dreams before she shared them, the pointed questions about her childhood, it all felt connected to something Jessica couldn't quite grasp. As she unlocked the front door, she found herself wondering if the dreams that had haunted her for years might be more than just nightmares after all. "You're home late tonight, sweetheart," Carol Mitchell said as Jessica entered the living room where she and Frank were watching the evening news. "Had coffee with someone from work," Jessica replied absently, but her adoptive parents immediately noticed her distracted mood. "Everything okay, Jess?" Frank asked with genuine concern. Jessica looked at the two people who had raised her with love and devotion, and for the first time in her life, she found herself wondering if there were things about her past that they had never told her. "Do you ever think about the day you found me?" she asked suddenly, surprising them both with the directness of her question. Detective Brooks worked through the night, using his law enforcement connections to dig deeper into Frank Mitchell's employment history. What he discovered made Victoria's theory seem increasingly credible. "Look at this," he said, pointing at the computer screen. Frank worked for Midwest Moving Company in 2003. According to their dispatch records, he had regular delivery routes that included Millennium Mall, sometimes 3 times a week. Victoria leaned over his shoulder, her heart racing as she saw the documented proof that Frank had been in the area where Chloe disappeared. "And here's the crucial detail," Brooks continued, scrolling down the employment records. "Frank called in sick on October 15th, 2003, the day after Chloe went missing. But he worked his regular shift on October 14th, which means he was at the mall the exact day your daughter disappeared." Brooks then pulled up Carol Mitchell's employment records from Chicago General Hospital. "This is even more interesting," he said grimly. Carol worked in the pediatric unit until March 2004, 5 months after Chloe's disappearance. She had access to birth certificates, medical records, and she would have known exactly how to create documentation for a child with no official paperwork. The timeline was damning. Carol had quit her job just when she would have needed time to establish Jessica's new identity. A former colleague I spoke to said Carol took extended leave in late 2003 for what she called family matters. Brooks added, "The pieces are fitting together too perfectly to be coincidence, Victoria. I think we've found your daughter." Brooks had even managed to track down Frank's former supervisor, who remembered the day after Chloe's disappearance clearly. Frank was supposed to deliver restaurant equipment to the mall food court that morning, the supervisor had told Brooks over the phone. But he called in at 6 a.m. saying he had the flu. Thing is, he'd never called in sick before in 2 years of working for us. Always showed up, rain or shine. Then a few weeks later, he quit and moved out of state with his wife. Said they wanted a fresh start. The supervisor's account provided the missing link in the timeline. Frank hadn't been sick. He'd been dealing with the aftermath of finding a lost child and making a life-changing decision to keep her. Brooks had also discovered that Carol's access to hospital records would have made it relatively easy to create a believable medical history for Jessica. Pediatric nurses have access to birth certificates, vaccination records, and medical databases, Brooks explained to Victoria. If Carol wanted to give Jessica a legal identity, she would have known exactly how to do it without raising red flags. She could have created medical records showing Jessica had been treated for trauma-related memory loss, which would explain the lack of early childhood memories. The more they investigated, the more Victoria realized how carefully planned Jessica's new identity had been. This wasn't a spontaneous act of kindness. It was a calculated decision to steal a child and hide the evidence. Armed with this evidence, Victoria and Brooks drove to the Mitchell family home in a quiet suburban neighborhood about 20 minutes from the diner. Victoria's hands trembled with anticipation and fear as they approached the house where her daughter had been living for 20 years. "Remember," Brooks cautioned as they parked across the street, "we need to handle this carefully. If we come on too strong, they might deny everything or even disappear. Let me take the lead initially." But Victoria's maternal instincts were screaming that she had waited long enough. After 2 decades of searching, her daughter was behind that front door, and nothing was going to keep her from reclaiming what had been stolen from her. The Mitchell house was exactly what Victoria would have expected. A modest but well-maintained home in a working-class neighborhood, with a small garden and children's toys scattered in the yard from visiting grandchildren. It looked like the home of people who had genuinely tried to provide a good life for Jessica, which made Victoria's emotions even more complicated. She was grateful that her daughter had been loved and cared for, but she was also furious that her own 20 years of grief and searching could have been avoided if the Mitchells had simply called the police when they found a lost child. As they approached the front door, Victoria could hear the sound of a television and normal family conversation inside, and she realized she was about to shatter the peaceful world that Jessica had known as reality. Frank Mitchell answered the door with a confused smile of someone who wasn't expecting visitors. "Can I help you folks?" he asked politely. But Victoria could see recognition dawning in his eyes as he looked at her face. She looked remarkably similar to how she had appeared in the media coverage 20 years ago, and Frank had obviously never forgotten the woman whose child had disappeared from a mall where he worked. "Mr. Mitchell," Brooks said, showing his retired detective badge, "I'm William Brooks, and this is Victoria Hamilton. We'd like to speak with you and your wife about Jessica." The color drained from Frank's face, and his hand gripped the doorframe as if he needed support to remain standing. Carol Mitchell appeared from the kitchen, took one look at Victoria's face, and immediately began crying. "Oh God, Frank," she whispered. "This is about Jessica, isn't it?" The couple sat on their couch, looking like defendants awaiting a verdict, while Victoria struggled to contain 20 years of suppressed rage and grief. "We know you were at Millennium Mall on October 14th, 2003, Brooks said directly. "We know you found a lost child there, and we know you never reported it to the authorities as required by law." Frank and Carol exchanged a look that confirmed everything Victoria had suspected, but she needed to hear them say it out loud. She needed them to admit they had stolen her daughter. Victoria pulled out her phone and showed them a photo of baby Chloe with her distinctive, star-shaped birthmark clearly visible. "This is my daughter Chloe," she said, her voice shaking with controlled emotion. "She disappeared from that mall 20 years ago. Jessica has the exact same birthmark in the exact same location." Carol's composure crumbled completely. "We were going to return her," she sobbed. "When we found her crying and lost, we were going to take her to security. But then we heard the announcements about the missing child, and we panicked. We've been trying to have children for 10 years. Frank had just lost his job, and she was so scared and alone. We told ourselves we were saving her from a system that might not take good care of her." Frank finally found his voice, his words heavy with 20 years of carried guilt. "We saw the news coverage," he admitted. "We saw you searching for her, saw how destroyed you were. Every day for 20 years, I wanted to call you and tell you she was safe and loved. But by then, Jessica was our daughter in every way that mattered, and we were terrified of losing her. We convinced ourselves that she was better off with us, that we could give her the stable home she needed." His voice broke as he continued. "We never meant to cause you pain, Mrs. Hamilton. We loved Jessica more than life itself, but we know what we did was wrong. We stole your daughter, and we stole 20 years of your life together. There's no excuse for what we did, and no forgiveness we deserve." Carol's confession poured out through her tears. "We found her sitting by the playground, crying and calling for her mama," she sobbed. "She was so little, so scared. Frank had just finished his delivery, and we were walking back to the truck when we saw her. We looked around for parents, but couldn't see anyone nearby. We were going to take her to mall security. I swear we were." Frank looked up with haunted eyes, adding, "But then we heard the announcement about the missing child over the intercom, and we realized this was the little girl everyone was looking for. We panicked. Carol had been trying to get pregnant for years. We'd just been told we couldn't have children naturally. And here was this perfect little angel who needed someone to love her." The scene Carol described played out in Victoria's mind as she spoke. 20 years ago, Frank and Carol Mitchell had been walking through the mall when they spotted a lost toddler crying by the playground. "She reached her little arms up to me," Carol continued through her tears. "And when I picked her up, she stopped crying and laid her head on my shoulder. It felt like she was meant to be ours. When we heard your voice over the speakers calling for Chloe, we knew we should have brought her to you immediately. But Frank had just lost his job. We were going through fertility treatments that weren't working, and this precious child seemed to trust us completely. We told ourselves we were protecting her," Frank said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We heard you on the phone during your business call, and we convinced ourselves that a mother who was too busy for her child couldn't provide the focused attention she needed. It was wrong, it was selfish, and it was the biggest mistake of our lives. But once we got her home and she started calling us Mama and Daddy, we couldn't bear the thought of losing her." Victoria's hands clenched into fists as she listened to their justification. "You had no right," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "You had no right to judge me, to decide my daughter would be better off without her real mother. Do you have any idea what 20 years of not knowing if your child is alive or dead does to a person? Victoria shot to her feet, 20 years of suppressed anguish exploding outward. I hired private investigators. I spent millions of dollars. I destroyed my marriage. I gave up everything trying to find her. And all this time, she was 20 minutes away, living with the people who stole her from me. Her voice cracked with the weight of 2 decades of grief. Every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone I missed because you decided you deserved my daughter more than I did. Detective Brooks gently placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to keep the situation from escalating, but Victoria's maternal rage was beyond control. She had found her daughter, but she had also found the people who had caused her 20 years of unbearable pain. At that moment, the front door opened and Jessica's voice called out cheerfully, "I'm home. Sorry I'm late. We got slammed during the dinner rush." The sound of her daughter's voice after 20 years of silence hit Victoria like a physical blow. She turned toward the hallway, her heart pounding as footsteps approached the living room. Frank and Carol's faces went pale with terror as they realized their daughter was about to walk into the middle of a conversation that would destroy everything she believed about her life. "Jessica, honey," Carol called out in a shaky voice, "we have some visitors. Could you come in here for a minute?" Jessica appeared in the living room doorway, still wearing her diner uniform, and froze when she saw the scene before her. Her adoptive parents were crying. There was a strange man with a badge, and the woman from the coffee shop was staring at her with an intensity that was both frightening and familiar. "What's going on?" Jessica asked, her voice small and uncertain. "Mom, Dad, why are you crying? Who are these people?" The confusion in her voice broke Victoria's heart all over again. This beautiful young woman had no idea that her entire life was built on a lie, that the people she called parents had stolen her from someone who had never stopped loving her. Carol looked at the daughter she had raised for 20 years, her face crumpling with the weight of the truth she was about to reveal. "Jessica, sweetheart, please sit down. We need to tell you something that's going to be very hard to hear." Jessica remained standing, her eyes darting between the faces in the room, sensing that whatever was coming would change everything. "The truth is," Carol began, her voice breaking, "we're not your biological parents. We found you when you were 2 years old, lost and crying in a shopping mall. And instead of returning you to your real mother, we kept you." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and Jessica's face went through a series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, dawning horror. "What do you mean you kept me?" Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible. "What do you mean I'm not your daughter?" Her legs seemed unsteady, and she grabbed the back of a chair for support. Victoria couldn't contain herself any longer. "Jessica," she said softly, "my name is Victoria Hamilton. 20 years ago, my 2-year-old daughter, Chloe, disappeared from a Chicago shopping mall. She had a star-shaped birthmark on her right wrist, just like yours. I've been searching for her ever since." Jessica's eyes went to her own wrist, where the distinctive mark had been visible her entire life, and the color drained from her face as the implications became clear. Jessica slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her whole body shaking with shock and betrayal. "You're telling me that everything I believed about my life is a lie," she whispered. "That my dreams about the crying woman weren't nightmares. They were memories? That you," she looked at Frank and Carol with devastation in her eyes, "stole me from my real mother and let her think I was dead for 20 years. The anguish in her voice was heartbreaking. Frank and Carol reached toward her, but Jessica flinched away from their touch. "Don't," she said firmly. "Don't touch me. I don't even know who you are anymore. I don't know who I am anymore." Jessica struggled to her feet, her face a mask of betrayal and confusion. "I need to get out of here," she said, her voice growing stronger with panic. "I need to think. She looked around the room at the people whose revelations had just destroyed her sense of reality, and her eyes finally settled on Victoria. "I don't know you," she said, though her tone was gentler than the one she'd used with the Mitchells. "You may be my biological mother, but you're still a stranger to me. And you," she turned back to Frank and Carol, You've been lying to me my entire life. I trusted you, I loved you, and you built my whole existence on a kidnapping." Without another word, she turned and ran from the house, leaving 4 adults standing in the wreckage of 20 years of deception and heartbreak. Jessica ran until her legs gave out, finally collapsing on a swing at the same neighborhood park where she'd played as a child. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was seeking comfort at a playground, just like the one where her life had changed forever 20 years ago. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from Frank and Carol, but she couldn't bear to hear their voices. Everything she thought she knew about herself was a lie. Her name wasn't even Jessica Mitchell. It was Chloe Hamilton. The dreams that had haunted her weren't nightmares. They were suppressed memories of being stolen from her real mother. The woman with blonde hair, crying and calling out Chloe, wasn't a figment of her imagination. It was Victoria, desperately searching for her lost daughter. Jessica stared at the star-shaped birthmark on her wrist that she'd always thought made her special and unique. Now she realized it was evidence of a crime, proof that she had been stolen from another life. "Chloe Hamilton," she whispered into the night, testing how the name felt on her tongue. It sounded foreign, yet somehow familiar, like a half-remembered song from childhood. She tried to imagine what her life would have been like if Frank and Carol had done the right thing 20 years ago. Would she have grown up in luxury as the daughter of a successful businesswoman? Would she have had siblings, gone to college, traveled the world? Instead, she'd spent her life struggling financially, working multiple jobs, never understanding why she felt like something was missing. Victoria had followed Jessica to the park, parking at a distance and watching the young woman process the devastating revelations. Every instinct screamed at her to run to her daughter and hold her, but she forced herself to approach slowly. Jessica looked so small and broken sitting on that swing, and Victoria's heart ached knowing that finding the truth had caused her daughter even more pain. "Jessica," she called softly from about 10 feet away. "I know you need space, but I couldn't let you sit here alone. Not after losing you once already." Jessica looked up, her eyes red from crying, and for a moment Victoria saw the frightened 2-year-old she remembered from 20 years ago. Jessica didn't run away when Victoria sat down on the opposite end of the park bench, maintaining careful distance. "I don't know what to call you," Jessica said quietly. "You're supposed to be my mother, but you're a stranger. Frank and Carol raised me, loved me, taught me everything I know, but they built it all on a lie." Victoria's heart broke hearing the confusion and pain in her daughter's voice. "You can call me Victoria for now," she said gently. "I know this is overwhelming. I know you can't just flip a switch and suddenly see me as your mother. But Jessica, Chloe, you have to know that not a single day has passed in 20 years that I didn't think about you, search for you, pray that you were safe and loved." "Tell me about that day," Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me what really happened." Victoria took a shaky breath and began the story she'd relived in nightmares for 2 decades. "You were playing on the playground at Millennium Mall. I was on a business call that I thought would only take a few minutes. When I looked up, you were gone. I searched everywhere, screaming your name until mall security found me. The police came, they issued an Amber Alert, but you had just vanished." Tears streamed down Victoria's face as she continued. "I never stopped looking for you. I hired private investigators. I spent millions of dollars. I destroyed my marriage because I couldn't give up hope. Your father, your biological father, he wanted to move on, but I couldn't accept that you were gone." "What happened to my father?" Jessica asked. "Your biological father's name is David Hamilton," Victoria explained. "We divorced 3 years after you disappeared because grief affects people differently. He remarried and moved to California. He tried to have other children, to build a new life, but I couldn't let go. I've lived the last 20 years like a ghost, existing only to search for you." Jessica absorbed this information, realizing that her disappearance had destroyed not just her own life, but her parents' marriage as well. "Does he know you found me?" she asked. Victoria shook her head. "I wanted to be sure first. I wanted to have DNA proof before I called him. But Jessica, he loved you so much. He still has your baby pictures, your room exactly as you left it. I don't know who I am anymore, Jessica confessed, her voice breaking. Am I Jessica Mitchell, the waitress who grew up in a working-class home with loving parents? Or am I Chloe Hamilton, the kidnapped daughter of a millionaire who should have had a completely different life? How do I reconcile 20 years of memories with the truth about how they were built on a lie? Victoria wanted desperately to comfort her daughter, but she knew that 20 years of separation couldn't be bridged with a single conversation. You're both, Victoria said softly. You're Jessica, the kind, hard-working, beautiful woman the Mitchells raised you to be. But you're also Chloe, my daughter who was stolen from me. Those two identities don't have to cancel each other out. What happens now? Jessica asked. Do Frank and Carol go to prison? Do I have to testify against them? Do I lose the only family I've ever known? Victoria had been dreading these questions because she knew the answers would cause Jessica more pain. Legally, what they did was kidnapping, even if their intentions weren't malicious, Victoria said carefully. But I don't want to see you hurt more than you already have been. If you want to maintain a relationship with them, I won't stand in your way. My priority is having you back in my life, not revenge. Jessica looked surprised by Victoria's response. She had expected anger, demands for justice, punishment for the people who had stolen 20 years of motherhood. Instead, Victoria was putting Jessica's emotional needs first. For the first time since the confrontation began, Jessica looked directly into Victoria's eyes and saw not a stranger, but a woman who had suffered immeasurable loss and was trying to handle an impossible situation with grace. You really never stopped looking for me, Jessica said, and it wasn't a question. Never, Victoria confirmed. Even when the police told me to accept that you were probably dead, even when my husband left me, even when friends said I was destroying my life chasing a ghost, I knew in my heart that you were alive somewhere, and that someday I'd find you. Jessica was quiet for a long moment, processing 20 years of a mother's unwavering love. I need time, she finally said. I need time to figure out how to be your daughter when I don't even know how to stop being theirs. Victoria stood up from the bench, offering Jessica her hand. Take all the time you need, she said. I've waited 20 years. I can wait longer if that's what you need. But please don't disappear again. Please let me be part of your life, even if it takes time to figure out how. Jessica looked at Victoria's outstretched hand for a long moment before taking it. The physical contact sent an electric shock through both women, mother and daughter touching for the first time in 20 years. I can't promise this will be easy, Jessica said. I can't promise I'll know how to be the daughter you've been dreaming of finding. Victoria squeezed her hand gently. You already are, she whispered. You're exactly the daughter I've been dreaming of, kind, strong, beautiful, and alive. Everything else we'll figure out together. 2 days later, Victoria met Jessica at the same park where they'd had their first real conversation. Jessica had called that morning, saying she was ready to learn more about her past, about the life she'd lost when she was 2 years old. Victoria arrived carrying photo albums, home videos on her laptop, and 20 years of memories she'd been desperate to share with someone who would understand their significance. Thank you for coming, Victoria said as she sat down beside Jessica, this time with less distance between them. I brought some things I thought you might want to see, pictures, videos from when you were little. I know it might be overwhelming, but I thought it could help you remember who you were before. Her voice trailed off, not wanting to speak harshly about the Mitchells when Jessica was still processing her complicated feelings about them. Victoria opened the first photo album, revealing pictures of baby Chloe that took Jessica's breath away. There she was as an infant, the star-shaped birthmark clearly visible even then, cradled in the arms of a much younger Victoria who glowed with new motherhood. You were such a happy baby, Victoria said softly, pointing to a photo of Chloe giggling in a high chair, food smeared across her face. You loved trying new foods, especially anything sweet. And you had this laugh that could fill an entire room with joy. Jessica stared at the photos, seeing her own features in the baby's face, recognizing expressions she still made today. I can't believe I'm looking at myself, she whispered. I never had baby pictures before. Frank and Carol said they didn't have any from when they found me. Now I know why. The photos were proof of a life she'd lived but couldn't remember, evidence of love she'd received but had been forced to forget. When Victoria opened her laptop and played the first video, Jessica gasped. There on the screen was 2-year-old Chloe, taking her first steps while Victoria cheered in the background. "Mama, look," the toddler called out in the video, clapping her hands with delight. Jessica's eyes filled with tears as she heard her own voice from 20 years ago, calling Victoria Mama with such pure love and trust. "You spoke early," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your first word was Mama, and you said it at 8 months. You were always trying to communicate, always wanting to share everything you discovered with me." In another video, little Chloe was dancing to music, spinning in circles until she fell down giggling. "You did that dance move constantly," Victoria remembered. "Every time you heard music, you'd start spinning. Even in grocery stores, you'd dance in the shopping cart." Jessica found herself smiling through her tears, finally understanding why she'd always felt compelled to dance when she heard certain songs. As Jessica watched the videos, something extraordinary began to happen. Fragments of genuine memories started surfacing, not the nightmares she'd been having, but real, happy moments from her early childhood. "I remember this," she said suddenly, pointing at a video of herself playing with blocks. "I remember you helping me stack them, and when they fell down, you'd say, oh, and we'd laugh." Victoria's heart soared as she realized her daughter was genuinely remembering their life together. "I remember you singing to me," Jessica continued, her eyes closed as she concentrated. "There was a song about stars, something about twinkling." Victoria began to sing softly. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are." Jessica's eyes flew open. "That's it. You used to sing that every night before bed, and you'd point to my birthmark when you sang about the star." The breakthrough was miraculous. After 20 years, mother and daughter were reconnecting through recovered memories. Victoria showed Jessica photos of her childhood bedroom, which had remained untouched for 20 years like a shrine to her missing daughter. The pink walls, the stuffed animals, the tiny clothes still hanging in the closet. Everything exactly as Chloe had left it the morning she disappeared. "You kept my room?" Jessica asked, her voice filled with wonder and disbelief. "I kept everything," Victoria confirmed. "Your favorite stuffed bunny is still on your bed. Your baby blanket is still in the crib we never took down. I couldn't bear to change anything because I always believed you'd come home someday." Jessica stared at the photos of her preserved childhood sanctuary, overwhelmed by the depth of a mother's love that had refused to accept loss. "I need to see it," she said suddenly. "I need to see my room, to touch the things that belonged to me before my life was stolen. Would that be okay?" Victoria's face lit up with joy and hope. "Of course. Whenever you're ready." An hour later, they stood in front of Victoria's mansion, a beautiful home that represented the life Jessica might have lived. "This is where I grew up?" Jessica asked, taking in the elegant architecture and manicured grounds. "This is where you would have grown up," Victoria corrected gently. "Where you should have grown up. I bought this house when you were 6 months old, dreaming of all the memories we'd make here together." As they walked up the front steps, Jessica felt a strange sense of familiarity, as if her soul recognized this place, even though her conscious mind had no memory of it. The house felt like coming home to a place she'd never been, which seemed impossible but undeniably real. Victoria unlocked the front door with trembling hands, about to share her most sacred space with the daughter she'd thought she'd lost forever. When Victoria opened the door to Chloe's preserved bedroom, Jessica stepped inside and immediately broke down crying. Everything was exactly as Victoria had described. The pink princess theme, the stuffed animals arranged on the bed, the tiny clothes hanging in the closet like artifact from a life that had been interrupted. Jessica picked up the stuffed bunny Victoria had mentioned, and suddenly another memory surfaced. "Hopscotch," she whispered. "His name was Hopscotch because he had one ear that flopped down." Victoria gasped, tears streaming down her face. "You remember him. You carried him everywhere. You wouldn't sleep without him." Jessica hugged the bunny to her chest, and for the first time in 20 years, felt complete. "I dreamed about this room," she realized. Not nightmares, good dreams. I always wondered where those happy dreams came from. Jessica sat in the small rocking chair by the window, the same chair where Victoria used to read bedtime stories 20 years ago. How did you keep hoping for so long? Jessica asked. How did you maintain this room, this faith that I'd come back, when everyone probably told you to move on? Victoria sat on the edge of the toddler bed, choosing her words carefully. Because a mother's love doesn't die when her child disappears, she said. Every birthday, I buy you a present and put it in your closet. Every Christmas, I'd wrap gifts and put them under a tree in this room. When friends said I was torturing myself, I told them I was keeping our connection alive. I knew that someday, somehow, you'd come home, and I wanted everything to be ready for you. Jessica looked around the room with new understanding, seeing 20 years of unwavering maternal devotion in every preserved detail. Later, as they sat in Victoria's living room looking through more photo albums, Jessica gradually moved closer to her mother until she was leaning against Victoria's shoulder. The physical closeness felt natural despite their years of separation, as if their bodies remembered the bond that trauma had forced them to forget. I want to try calling you Mom, Jessica said quietly. Not yet. Maybe not for a while, but someday I want to be able to say that word and mean it the way I did when I was 2. Victoria's heart nearly burst with joy at this tentative step toward true reconciliation. Take all the time you need, Victoria whispered, gently stroking Jessica's hair the way she'd done 20 years ago. I've waited this long to be your mother again. I can wait until you're ready to let me. For the first time since the truth had been revealed, Jessica felt like she might actually be able to bridge the gap between her two identities and find peace. As the sun set through the living room windows, casting everything in golden light, Jessica made a decision that would change both their lives. I want to try, she said, looking up at Victoria. I want to try being your daughter again. I don't know how to do it, and I can't promise it won't be complicated with Frank and Carol still in my life, but I want to try. Victoria felt tears of pure joy streaming down her face. We'll figure out together, she promised. You can take it as slow as you need. You can keep working at the diner if that makes you feel secure. You can maintain your relationship with the Mitchells if that's what you need. All I want is the chance to know the amazing woman my little girl grew up to become. Jessica sat up and, for the first time in 20 years, looked directly into her mother's eyes and smiled. Hi, Mom, she whispered tentatively, testing how the word felt. Victoria's response was immediate and heartfelt. Hi, baby girl. Welcome home. 6 months later, Jessica walked across the graduation stage at Denver University, receiving her bachelor's degree in business administration, an education that Victoria had quietly funded while Jessica transitioned into her new life. In the audience, Victoria applauded with tears of joy streaming down her face, finally able to witness one of her daughter's major milestones. Beside Victoria sat Frank and Carol Mitchell, their relationship with Jessica now complicated but not severed. After months of family therapy and legal consultations, they had reached an understanding that prioritized Jessica's emotional well-being above all else. Frank and Carol had pleaded guilty to custodial interference charges but received suspended sentences and community service, largely because Jessica had asked the court for leniency. They loved me, she had told the judge. They made a terrible choice 20 years ago, but they gave me a good life, and they deserve a chance to be part of my future. Jessica had also begun working part-time at Victoria's flagship hotel, learning the hospitality business from the ground up. Her natural people skills and genuine warmth made her a perfect fit for the industry, just as Victoria had always dreamed. You have an instinct for this, Victoria observed as she watched Jessica handle a difficult guest complaint with grace and professionalism. It's like hospitality is in your DNA. Jessica smiled at the comment, still marveling at how genetics had guided her toward a career path that connected her to her mother's world. She had kept her job at the diner 2 days a week, partly for financial independence, but mostly because it reminded her of her journey and kept her grounded in the person she had become during those 20 years away from her birth family. Victoria had also fulfilled a promise she'd made to herself by establishing the Hamilton Foundation for Missing Children, using her wealth and connections to help other families navigate the nightmare she had endured for 2 decades. Jessica had become actively involved in the foundation, sharing her unique perspective as someone who had been successfully recovered after years of separation. "Every family deserves the ending we got," Jessica said during a foundation fundraising event. "Every child deserves to come home, and every parent deserves to never give up hope." Her testimony was powerful because she could speak from both sides of the experience, as a recovered child and as someone who understood the complexity of loving multiple families. The foundation had already helped reunite 12 families in its first 6 months of operation. One of Jessica's biggest challenges had been reaching out to her biological father, David Hamilton, who is now living in California with his second wife and their twin daughters. The phone call had been awkward and emotional, with David crying openly when he heard his lost daughter's voice for the first time in 20 years. "Chloe, is it really you?" he had whispered through his tears. "I never stopped loving you, never stopped hoping, but I had to try to build a new life when the search seemed hopeless." Jessica had been nervous about potentially disrupting David's new family, but his wife Sarah had been incredibly understanding and welcoming. "You're not disrupting anything," Sarah had assured Jessica during their first video call. "You're completing our family. Our daughters are so excited to meet their big sister." The twins, now 8 years old, had immediately accepted Jessica and peppered her with questions about her life and adventures. When David flew to Denver to meet Jessica in person, their reunion was everything Victoria had hoped it would be. Father and daughter stood in the airport, both crying as they held each other for the first time since Jessica was 2 years old. "You look just like your mother did at your age," David said, cupping Jessica's face in his hands. "But you have my stubborn chin and your grandfather's eyes." Jessica felt another piece of her identity click into place as she recognized familiar features in her father's face. David's new wife Sarah and the twins had accompanied him, and Jessica was amazed at how easily she connected with her half-sisters. "We've been waiting our whole lives to meet you," one of the twins told her seriously. "Daddy told us we had a big sister who got lost, but he always said you'd find your way home someday." Jessica had also worked hard to maintain her relationship with Frank and Carol Mitchell, understanding that they had genuinely loved her even though their actions had been wrong. Family therapy had helped them navigate the complex emotions surrounding their situation, and they had developed new boundaries that acknowledged both their role in raising Jessica and the pain they had caused Victoria. "We know we can never undo the hurt we caused," Carol had said during one particularly difficult session. "But we love Jessica, and if she wants us in her life, we want to earn the right to stay." Jessica appreciated their willingness to face the consequences of their actions while still being the supportive parental figures she needed. "You'll always be my mom and dad, too," she had told them. "I can love you and Victoria at the same time. Love isn't a limited resource." At the Foundation's first annual gala, Jessica gave a keynote speech that brought the audience to tears. "6 months ago, I didn't know my real name," she began. "I didn't know I had a mother who had spent 20 years searching for me, or a father who had never stopped hoping I'd come home. I didn't know I had half-sisters who had been waiting to meet me, or that I had the resources to help other families avoid the pain mine had endured." She paused, looking out at the audience of donors and supporters. "But I also didn't know that love could survive 20 years of separation, that hope could persist through decades of disappointment, or that families could heal from even the most devastating losses. Tonight, I stand before you as proof that miracles do happen, that lost children can be found, and that it's never too late to come home." During Thanksgiving dinner at Victoria's mansion, Jessica looked around the table at her expanded family and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Victoria sat at the head of the table, finally able to host the family gathering she had dreamed of for 20 years. David and his wife Sarah had flown in from California with the twins, who were fascinated by their big sister's story and insisted on hearing it repeatedly. Even Frank and Carol had been invited, joining the celebration with nervous but genuine appreciation for being included despite their complicated history. "I want to say something," Jessica announced, raising her glass. "6 months ago, I thought I knew who I was and where I belonged. I was wrong about the details, but I was right about the most important thing. I belong with people who love me unconditionally. The Hamilton Foundation continued to grow and succeed, with Jessica serving as both spokesperson and program coordinator. The office walls were covered with photos of families they had helped reunite, each success story a testament to the power of never giving up hope. "Look at this," Jessica said, pointing to a letter from a family in Texas whose son had been found after 3 years missing. "They said our foundation gave them the strength to keep searching when everyone else told them to move on. We're not just finding children, we're keeping hope alive for families who are living our nightmare." Victoria watched her daughter coordinate search efforts and comfort grieving parents with a maturity and wisdom that amazed her. Jessica had transformed her own trauma into a mission to help others, turning her painful experience into something meaningful and healing. In the final scene, Jessica sat in the executive office of Hamilton Hotels, signing papers to officially join her mother's business as vice president of guest relations. Around her neck, she wore a delicate star-shaped pendant that Victoria had given her, a symbol of the birthmark that had reunited them, and a reminder that sometimes the things that make us different are actually the things that lead us home. Ready to run a hotel empire together? Victoria asked with a smile, and Jessica laughed. "I think I've been preparing for this my whole life without knowing it," she replied. "All those years of waiting tables taught me about hospitality and customer service. The Mitchells taught me about hard work and treating everyone with respect. And you taught me that love never gives up, no matter how long it takes." Victoria looked at her daughter, successful, confident, and finally whole, and reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 20 years of searching, hoping, and refusing to surrender had led to this. A family reunited, a business partnership formed, and a foundation created to help other families find their way back to each other. As mother and daughter worked side by side, planning the future of their company and their foundation, Victoria whispered a prayer of gratitude for the persistence that had brought her daughter home and the faith that had carried them both through the darkest years of their separation. Were you watching this incredible story from today? What did you think about Jessica and Victoria's amazing reunion? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up if it touched your heart. And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring true stories that prove love and faith can overcome any obstacle.